So let's just, perhaps if you don't mind, let's stir this conversation towards, the benefit of our audience here, these young students who are just starting out. Um, Most of them, I would predominantly say, are second language learners, but they're doing a fantastic job over here. And one of the areas I would say, as teachers that are directing education over here, is the challenge that young students face when they have an idea. They have an idea, but they don't know how to systematically develop that into a full story and build characters and build a plot. I mean, what
Yeah,
what advice can you give to
yeah,
our young crowd tonight?
that's a very perceptive question, and you're obviously in tune with these students. Um, yeah, that's the whole key to it. I think is I've always had, even since I was a little kid, I've had just a crazy imagination. I mean, I was kind of the weird kid who'd go play in the woods. I'd get home from school and go play in the woods, and I'd pretend all kinds of things, and I climbed trees a lot, just had this sense of adventure. And and so my whole childhood and when growing into adulthood, I was just always, man, that would be a cool idea. Man, that would be a cool idea. But then I had absolutely no clue how to turn these ideas into an actual book. Um, so I went through a lot of growing pains, just messing around with it, um, trying to write. I'd read so many books. That was basically my education for how to write, was all the books I'd read. And and I think I learned a lot through a few years of trial and error. But I kept noticing that I wasn't finishing anything. I was starting things, not finishing. And one day I just decided, okay, I'm just going to write this book. I don't care how terrible it is. I'm just going to write it, and I'm going to write it until it's over. And I'm going to write a complete novel and just see if I can do it. And so I sat down, and I honestly didn't really do much outlining or planning. I just sat down and wrote a book, and I finished it, and it ended up being pretty good. And I was like, I had this mental block in my head just collapse, because once you realize you can start and finish a book, it just becomes a lot easier to actually do it. Of course, the next step is to do it and make it an actual good book that other people would want to read.
Sure.
And I think if you've got the ideas in your head, I would I would suggest sitting down and doing an extremely easy, brief outline where, like, okay, I'm going to come up first with, what is the premise of this story? Just a really simple, like one sentence or one paragraph. This story is going to be about a rabbit that has special powers, and he travels to the moon and discovers a civilization of mice. I don't know. I mean, that was really stupid, but you get what I mean. Just a
Right.
basic premise for the story. And then try to come up with 5 or 6 characters. You don't have to commit to their names, just write 5 names down. And the way I would always do my characters is I would start with a little seed for that character. I'd say, okay, this guy is really, really smart, but he has a hard time talking to people. And this lady is kind of a smart aleck and is always making jokes. This character is a little bit somber. He's sad. Something's happened in his past to make him sad. And just start developing the characters. And then instead of worrying about, some authors do like 20, 30-page outlines. I usually just do 1 page of notes jotted down of basically what cool scenes or what the basic plot is. So you do a little planning like that, but then you just got to jump into it. You got to think, okay, what happens in chapter 1? and write that first sentence, and then write the second sentence and get that first paragraph done, and then get the first page done, and then try to get page 2 done. And you just got to start working at it. And I think you'll fall in love with that process, and those things that are trapped in your head will flow out onto the page. And the very act of writing, it's just like practicing piano. The act
Mm.
of writing makes you better, and you'll just get better and better at it.
Love it. I mean, I love the way you initially mentioned how you had that mental block and then you managed to just get down to it and just write the entire story. I think you just kept it organic. Sometimes even as teachers, we tend to get very mechanic with the writing process. And sometimes
Yeah,
that's where the students really, really struggle. Okay, well, what do I do next? So I love the
right.
way, that advice that you've given us, that you just got to get it on with writing and just continue. So it's
Yeah.
wonderful. Which leads me on to the next question. I mean, in terms of how, I mean, you mentioned, you finish one page, but how do we maintain that consistency, I guess, or how did you maintain that consistency across
Yeah.
your long series?
You know, for one thing, the fact that the fact that you are, that you ask a great question like that, and if you as the writer are just being aware of the issue, like,
Mhm.
I mean, a lot of times you'll think, well, this is common sense. Of course, I want to have the same style and consistency in my writing. But you just got to keep it in your head. Okay, you definitely have to do that. And so you're aware of it as you're writing. And then you just got to trust your instincts. Um, I feel like a lot of times we don't just trust what our mind is telling us to put on the page. And, it's such a hard thing to describe. Like how I do it is I just have a gut feeling of what the overall style and mood and atmosphere and theme of the story is. And I just trust my instincts as I'm writing that it will put it together and keep that consistency. But keeping in mind, of course, the editing is such a huge part of this process.
Right.
I guess a lot of times when I write that first draft, I really try not to worry too much about um, all the millions of mechanical type, technical type things that we need to be aware of. I just really trust my instincts and write it. And then in the editing process, of course, I'll find lots of things that I need to go back and fix or improve or change or delete. I think that consistency you're talking about can also heavily rely on the editing process.
Right. Wonderful. And in terms of the characters, I think the way you manage to bring your characters to life um, in your stories was phenomenal, and how you maintain that consistent suspense. I mean,
Yeah.
how did you go around doing that? I mean, was there a set formula for that? Because the way you timed every single suspense was perfect.
Oh, thank
and
you.
and
That
the
is so
tone and
kind.
the tone and the tone that you maintained as well was superb. So I mean, how did you manage to do that?
Well, the clue is kind of in your question. You talked about the characters,
Yeah.
and so many things are important in writing a story, but nothing is as important as the characters in the story. So, and I try to preach this with every ounce of my soul, because even if even if we're not aware of it, when we read a book or see a movie, it's all about the characters. And from the very beginning of Maze Runner, I knew that, okay, a lot of crazy stuff is going to happen. There's going to be a lot of scary things. There's going to be a lot of suspense. But this story, in the end, is going to be about the characters. And so I put so much effort into taking my different characters and, first of all, making sure that they were different from each other. You know, in my early writing, I would notice when I read my book again, I just felt like all the characters were kind of roughly the same. They were all kind of goofy, kind of smart Alex, cracking jokes. With the Maze Runner, it was the first time I think I really tried to take each character and make them their own person. And the reason that relates to your question about how do you keep up the suspense, it's helped a lot by once you have the reader attached to your characters, and once they feel like they're real people, suddenly jeopardy becomes a real thing. If your characters are in jeopardy or in a scary situation, the reader is really going to feel that because, say you have a character named Thomas, and we have spent time kind of showing Thomas's personality, what hurts him, his pains, how he feels being ripped out of the world and put into this situation. Suddenly, those scenes of suspense really ratchet up. And, you've probably watched a movie or read a book where the characters were kind of flat and just didn't have much depth to them or much personality. And you'll be watching a movie or something, you're like, I don't even care if this character dies. This isn't suspenseful. I don't care about this guy. But if you do care about them, then things can get really scary. I always tried to, the other, when you ask just how I did it with the pacing and how scenes are resolved, what creates the scenes. I do have, like I say, when I wrote out that 1-page outline for each book, I would try to brainstorm and come up with a good 6 or 7 scenes, based on my world and based on their circumstances, where suspense can happen, where someone's life can be in jeopardy. And then again, I would just kind of use my instincts on how to pace those throughout the story, how to give breaks in the story where we can kind of take a breath, relax, focus on the characters again, being safe for a moment. And then just when you think everything's fine, blow it all up again and have something new happen.